hands up. Drop the notebook, now. You're trespassing in a secure facility.
Officer, lower your voice. I'm a federal official conducting a DOT compliance audit. I am lawfully here.
Man, I don't care who you claim to be. Manager says you don't belong. Turn around and get on the ground.
You touch me, you're violating federal law.
Officer Kyle Vance had been with the Metro Police Department for just over 6 years when he made the decision that would implode his career and cost the taxpayers of his city a staggering $6.5 million. He was 28 years old, aggressive, and possessed a track record that suggested he viewed the community he served more as a battlefield than a neighborhood. It was a bright, clear Tuesday morning in October. The sun was shining, the air was crisp, and the world was moving at its usual frantic pace. But inside the sprawling distribution center of North Point, logistics time was about to stop. Vance received a dispatch call regarding a trespasser, a suspicious individual who refused to identify himself. The individual in question was Marcus Thorne, a 58-year-old black man wearing a 3-piece charcoal suit that cost more than Vance's monthly salary. Thorne wasn't a trespasser. He was the federal director of compliance for the Department of Transportation, and he was in the middle of a federally mandated blind audit of the facility's hazardous materials handling. What Vance did next, ignoring protocol, mocking a federal badge, and physically assaulting a high-ranking government official, would serve as a humiliating lesson on the high cost of unchecked ego and implicit bias. Before we get into the details of this catastrophic failure of judgment, tell us where you are watching from today. And if you believe that authority should always be tempered with wisdom, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We bring you these stories because the truth matters, and accountability is the only way forward. North Point Logistics is a behemoth of industry, a 1 million-square-foot facility sitting on the edge of the industrial district. It is a place of constant motion where conveyor belts hum like a hive of mechanical bees and forklifts zip back and forth with calculated precision. It was 9:15 a.m. The morning shift was in full gear. The air smelled of diesel fumes, cardboard dust, and hydraulic fluid. Marcus Thorne stood on the elevated observation catwalk that ran the length of the warehouse's eastern wall. He had been standing there for 20 minutes, a leather-bound notebook in his left hand and a gold fountain pen in his right. He was observing the loading dock procedures below, specifically watching how the morning crew was labeling Class 3 flammable liquids. Thorne had a presence that usually commanded a room without him saying a word. At 6'2", with broad shoulders that hinted at his military past and graying hair cut close to his scalp, he looked like a man who solved problems for a living. And he was. He had arrived at the facility at 8:50 a.m., checked in at the main security gate using his federal credentials, and proceeded to the observation deck as per the prearranged agreement with the company's corporate headquarters in Chicago. However, the local management on the floor hadn't been warned. That was the point of a blind audit. You don't tell the students the answers to the test before you hand it out. Thorne was calm, meticulous, and completely within his legal rights. He wasn't hiding. He was standing under a bank of LED lights visible to anyone who looked up. But to the wrong pair of eyes, his presence was an anomaly that needed to be purged. Marcus Thorne was not a man who arrived at his position by accident. His resume was a testament to a life of service and rigid discipline. Before he ever put on a suit for the Department of Transportation, he had spent 24 years in the United States Marine Corps, retiring with the rank of colonel. He had led logistics battalions in 2 different combat theaters. He understood supply lines, he understood safety, and he understood the chain of command better than almost anyone alive. After retiring from the Corps, he transitioned to the federal government, spending the last 20 years climbing the ranks of the DOT through sheer competence and an unshakable adherence to the rule of law. Thorne was the kind of man who ironed his shirts on weekends and read regulatory code for leisure. He took his job seriously because he knew the consequences of negligence. If a truck carrying volatile chemicals wasn't loaded correctly, people died on the interstate. If a warehouse cut corners on storage neighborhoods burned down. He viewed his role as a guardian of public safety. That Tuesday morning, he was looking for patterns of negligence. He had already noted 3 minor violations regarding forklift spacing and 1 concerning violation regarding emergency exit blockage. He was focused, writing in his notebook, his mind analyzing the workflow below. He was 58 years old, a grandfather of 3, and a deacon at his local church. He drove a modest sedan, paid his taxes early, and believed deeply in the institutions of American democracy. He was the definition of a law-abiding citizen. More than that, he was a federal law enforcement officer in his own right, possessing arrest powers within his jurisdiction and holding a security clearance that would make most local police chiefs dizzy. But as he stood on that catwalk, reviewing the manifest labels through a pair of small binoculars, he wasn't wearing a neon vest. He wasn't wearing a hard hat. He was a black man in a suit, standing still in a place where everyone else was moving, watching, in a place where everyone else was working. And that stillness, that confidence, was about to trigger a chain reaction of prejudice that would shatter the morning's peace. The catalyst for this disaster was Braden Cole. At 34 years old, Cole was the operations manager for the North Point facility. He was a man perpetually on the edge of a nervous breakdown driven by corporate quotas he couldn't quite meet, and a deep-seated insecurity about his own authority. Cole had been in the position for 2 years, and the turnover rate on his floor was the highest in the district. He managed by intimidation, constantly prowling the floor looking for workers who were slacking off. He viewed outsiders with intense suspicion. To Cole, the warehouse was his kingdom, and anyone he didn't recognize was an invader. At 9:20 a.m., Cole was shouting at a forklift driver when he happened to look up toward the east catwalk. He stopped mid-sentence. He saw Thorne. In Cole's mind, the equation didn't balance. Corporate never sent inspectors without emailing him first. Vendors wore badges and stayed in the lobby. This man was standing on the catwalk writing things down, looking through binoculars. Cole's mind didn't go to inspector. It didn't go to owner. It went immediately to threat. He watched Thorne for 2 minutes, his anger building. "Who is this guy?" he muttered to a shift supervisor. "Looks like he's casing the joint, probably writing down security schedules or inventory lists for a theft ring." It was a leap of logic so vast it should have been laughable, but Cole believed it instantly. He didn't check with the front gate. He didn't walk up the stairs to ask the man his business, which would have been the rational, professional thing to do. Instead, Cole felt a surge of territorial aggression. He wanted the man gone, and he wanted to show his staff that he was in control. He pulled out his cell phone and dialed 911. "I need police at North Point Logistics immediately," Cole told the dispatcher, his voice tight with manufactured panic. "We have a trespasser inside the secure zone. He's refusing to leave and he's acting suspicious. I think he might be armed or coordinating a theft." The dispatcher asked if the man had threatened anyone. "He's watching us," Cole said, breathless. "He's casing the floor. He doesn't belong here. I need an officer now." This is the moment where the system relies on the integrity of the caller. Cole lied. He hadn't asked Thorne to leave. He hadn't even spoken to him. But he painted a picture of an active intruder, a criminal in a suit turning a routine administrative audit into a priority 1 police call. The dispatch went out. North Point Logistics. Trespassing in progress. Suspect described as a black male 50s dark suit. Complainant alleges suspect is casing the facility and refusing to vacate. Officer Kyle Vance was 3 miles away when the call came across his radio. Vance was not the kind of officer who de-escalated. His personnel file was a minefield of red flags that the department had studiously ignored. In 6 years, he had racked up 14 use-of-force reports, nearly double the average for his precinct. He had 4 civilian complaints for rudeness and intimidation. His supervisors described him as proactive and energetic code words for an officer who went looking for trouble. Vance believed in the warrior cop ethos. He didn't see himself as a public servant. He saw himself as a soldier in enemy territory. When he heard the dispatch, trespasser, refusing to vacate, casing the facility, Vance's adrenaline spiked. He didn't hear man in a suit. He heard criminal defying authority. He hit his lights and sirens, cutting through traffic with aggressive swerves. He was already writing the arrest report in his head before he even saw the building. He arrived at North Point Logistics at 9:32 a.m., screeching his cruiser to a halt right in front of the loading bays blocking 2 delivery trucks. He stepped out of the vehicle, adjusting his utility belt. He didn't put on his hat. He didn't look for the manager. He walked straight onto the warehouse floor, his hand resting near his holster, his eyes scanning for the target. The warehouse floor fell silent as the police officer strode in. Workers stopped their machines. Heads turned. Vance spotted the catwalk stairs and saw the figure standing at the top. It was Thorne, still writing in his notebook, seemingly unbothered by the sudden silence below. Vance didn't take the time to observe. He didn't notice the expensive cut of the suit or the calm demeanor. He saw a black man in a place where the manager said he shouldn't be. Vance bounded up the metal stairs, his boots clanging loudly against the grate. He wanted to dominate the space. He wanted to end the threat. Marcus Thorne heard the heavy boots and turned slowly, closing his notebook. He saw a young officer, face flushed with aggression, storming toward him. Thorne didn't flinch. He had stared down warlords and generals. A beat cop didn't frighten him, but he was concerned. He knew the look in Vance's eyes. It was the look of a man who had stopped thinking. "You hands where I can see them now." Vance screamed the command from 20 feet away, his voice echoing off the metal roof. Thorne held his notebook in his left hand and raised his empty right-hand palm open. He didn't raise them high like a criminal surrendering. He held them at chest level, a gesture of calm compliance, mixed with confusion. "Officer, there is no need to shout. I am conducting a federal—" "I said hands drop the book. Drop it." Vance closed the distance rapidly, invading Thorne's personal space. He was chest to chest with the older man now. "You are trespassing. You need to get on the ground right now." Thorne held his ground, his voice steady, the voice of a man used to giving orders, not taking them from children. "Young man, you are making a mistake. I am Marcus Thorne, Federal Director of Compliance for the DOT. I have identification in my pocket. I am authorized to be here." "I don't care who you say you are." Vance spat his hand, gripping the handle of his taser. "The manager says you're trespassing. That means you're going to jail. Turn around." "I am not trespassing," Thorne said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously low. "I am a federal officer. If you touch me, you are violating Title 18 of the United States Code. I am going to reach into my jacket pocket and show you my credentials. Don't you move." Vance unholstered his taser and pointed it at Thorne's chest. The red laser dot danced on the lapel of the $2,000 suit. "You reach for anything, and I will light you up. Get on the ground. Last warning." The absurdity of the moment hung heavy in the air. A 58-year-old federal director was being held at taser point by a 28-year-old patrolman, while hundreds of warehouse workers watched from below. Phones were out. The cameras were rolling. Thorne looked at the taser, then at Vance's eyes. He saw no reason there, only adrenaline and bias. He knew that if he moved too fast, this officer would shoot him. "I am complying," Thorne said clearly and loudly for the witnesses. "I am standing still. I am not resisting, but I am not getting on the ground. I am a government official on active duty." Vance didn't know how to handle non-compliance that wasn't physical resistance. His training, or what he had absorbed of it, told him that verbal refusal was a threat. He holstered the taser and lunged forward. He grabbed Thorne's right arm and twisted it violently behind his back. Thorne grunted in pain but didn't fight back. He allowed the officer to manipulate his body, knowing that every bruise was another 0 on the settlement check. Vance slammed Thorne against the railing of the catwalk. "Stop resisting!" Vance shouted, despite Thorne standing perfectly still. "I am not resisting," Thorne said through gritted teeth. "You are assaulting a federal agent. Verify my credentials. They are in my left breast pocket. Do it now. Shut up. Vance slapped the cuffs on Thorne's wrists, tightening them to the point of pain. He reached into Thorne's pocket and yanked out the leather credential case. He flipped it open. He saw the gold medallion, the Department of Transportation, seal the words, Director of Compliance. Any rational officer would have paused. Vance scoffed. Nice prop. What you buy this online impersonating a Fed, that's another charge. He shoved the credentials into his own pocket without even reading the name or the badge number. That is a legitimate federal badge, Thorne said, his voice icy. You are making a career-ending error. Walk. Vance shoved Thorne toward the stairs. The walk of shame was public and humiliating. Vance marched Marcus Thorne down the metal stairs and across the entire length of the warehouse floor. Braden Cole, the manager who had started it all, stood near the loading bay doors, arms crossed, a smug look of satisfaction on his face. He thought he had won. He thought he had protected his turf. He had no idea he had just fired the starting gun on his own termination. You see this? Vance shouted to the workers as he pushed Thorne along. This is what happens when you trespass. Thorne kept his head up. He made eye contact with the workers filming him. My name is Director Marcus Thorne, he said clearly. I am being arrested unlawfully by the Metro Police. Please keep recording. Shut your mouth, Vance hissed, opening the back door of his cruiser. He shoved Thorne into the hard plastic seat, heedless of the older man's stiff joints. He slammed the door, sealing Thorne inside the cage. Vance got into the driver's seat, feeling a rush of triumph. He had caught the bad guy. He had secured the scene. He radioed dispatch. Suspect in custody. One male charged with trespassing, resisting arrest, and impersonation of a peace officer. En route to the station. The drive to the precinct took 15 minutes. It was a 15-minute funeral procession for Officer Vance's career, though he didn't know it yet. Thorne sat in the back silent. He was performing a breathing exercise he had learned in the Marines. He was categorizing the offenses. Unlawful detainment, assault, battery, kidnapping, violation of civil rights under color of law. He memorized the time. He memorized the car number, Unit 402. He looked at the back of Vance's head and felt a profound sense of pity mixed with fury. Vance glanced in the rearview mirror. You're quiet now. Not so big without your fake badge, huh? Thorne didn't respond. He saved his words for someone who could actually listen. They arrived at the precinct at 10:15 a.m. Vance pulled into the sally port, unloaded his prisoner, and marched him into the booking area. The booking area was busy, but the sight of Officer Vance dragging a man in a bespoke suit stopped the conversation. Behind the high desk sat Sergeant Thomas Miller, the watch commander. Miller was 54 years old, a 30-year veteran who had started walking the beat when Vance was in diapers. Miller knew the streets, and more importantly, he knew people. Miller looked up and saw Thorne. He saw the quality of the suit. He saw the haircut. He saw the posture. And then he looked at Vance, who was grinning like a hunter with a trophy buck. Miller's stomach dropped. What do we have here, Vance? Miller asked, his voice cautious. Trespassing at North Point Logistics, Vance announced proudly. Guy refused to leave, resisted arrest, and get this, he tried to flash a fake federal badge. Miller looked at Thorne. Thorne looked at Miller. It was a look of mutual understanding between two men of a certain age and experience. Sergeant Thorne said, his voice calm and authoritative. My name is Marcus Thorne. I am the Federal Director of Compliance for the U.S. Department of Transportation. The credentials in Officer Vance's pocket are real. I am asking you as the ranking officer to pick up that phone and call the Department of Transportation verification line in Washington, D.C. immediately. The room went deadly silent. Miller stood up. Vance, give me the credentials. Sarge, they're fake. I've seen. Give me the damn credentials, Kyle. Miller snapped. Vance handed over the leather case. Miller opened it. He felt the weight of the badge. He looked at the holographic overlay on the ID card. He saw the security chip embedded in the plastic. He had seen fake IDs before. This wasn't one of them. Miller picked up the phone. He looked at Thorne. Badge number DC-45 Alpha 990, Thorne recited instantly. Miller dialed. He waited. The color began to drain from his face as he listened to the voice on the other end. Yes. Yes, I have him here. Yes, sir. I understand. No, sir. We are correcting it now. Miller hung up the phone very slowly. He looked at Vance, and his expression was one of absolute horror. Take the cuffs off, Miller whispered. Sarge. Take the cuffs off right now, Miller roared, slamming his hand on the desk. That is the federal director of compliance. You just arrested a federal official for doing his job. Vance froze. The world tilted on its axis. But the manager said... I don't care what the manager said. Miller came around the desk. He pushed Vance aside and unlocked the handcuffs himself. Director Thorne, I cannot express how sorry I am. Thorne rubbed his wrists. There were deep red indentations where the metal had bitten into his skin. He looked at Vance, who was now trembling, his bravado evaporating like mist. Officer Vance, Thorne said, his voice quiet but echoing in the silent room. You refused to look at my ID. You refused to listen. You assumed that because of how I look, I could not possibly be who I said I was. You didn't just break protocol. You broke the law. Thorne turned to Miller. I want his badge number. I want the body camera footage secured immediately, and I want to speak to the chief of police, now. The fallout was swift, brutal, and public. The video from the warehouse workers hit the internet before Thorne had even left the police station. The image of a young white officer shoving an older black man in a suit, ignoring his pleas to check his badge, went viral instantly. The narrative was undeniable. It wasn't a split-second decision in a dark alley. It was a prolonged, arrogant refusal to acknowledge reality. Officer Kyle Vance was placed on administrative leave that afternoon. He was terminated 3 weeks later. The internal investigation found that he had violated 14 separate department policies, including unlawful arrest, excessive force, and failure to investigate. But the department didn't just fire him to save face. They had to. The Department of Justice signaled immediate interest in the case. Vance was stripped of his certification, ensuring he would never work in law enforcement again. Braden Cole, the manager at North Point, fared no better. When corporate headquarters in Chicago saw the footage and realized their own manager had arrested the federal auditor they had invited, they were apoplectic. Cole was fired for gross negligence and filing a false police report. He was blacklisted from the logistics industry, but the checkbook justice was the most quantifying measure of the error. Marcus Thorne filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against the city and the police department. The evidence was overwhelming. The refusal to verify the badge was the nail in the coffin. The city attorneys didn't even try to fight it. They settled for $6.5 million, one of the largest individual payouts in the city's history. North Point Logistics, desperate to save their federal contracts, settled a separate suit with Thorne for an undisclosed amount, rumored to be in the 7 figures, and pledged to overhaul their management training on bias. Marcus Thorne returned to work 2 weeks later. He stood before the city council during a hearing on police reform. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. He spoke with the quiet dignity of a man who knows the truth. Thorne said, looking at the council members, a federal director, a veteran, a man in a suit with a badge in his pocket can be treated like a criminal because of an officer's assumption. Then God help the young man in a hoodie who has nothing but his word. The room was silent. It brings us to the end of this story, but the beginning of a necessary question. We often talk about bad apples, but we rarely talk about the basket that holds them. Officer Vance was emboldened by a system that rarely checks credentials before it applies handcuffs. Braden Cole was emboldened by a culture that sees black existence as suspicious. Marcus Thorne walked away with millions, but he would have traded every cent to not have been humiliated in front of the working men and women he was sworn to protect. Money pays bills, It does not heal dignity. What do you think? Should officers be personally liable financially when they ignore clear evidence and make wrongful arrests? And should making a biased 911 call be a criminal offense with jail time? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. These conversations are difficult, but they are the only way we change the narrative. Thank you for watching, and thank you for being part of a community that seeks the truth. Until next time, stay safe and stay aware.